I returned from the airport because I had forgotten my passport at home, but what I heard through the window between my daughter and my son-in-law changed my life forever. It was impossible to believe what my own ears were picking up. I had planned that trip for months. Everything was perfectly organized, but a simple forgetfulness brought me back just at the exact moment to discover the most painful truth of my existence. My heart was racing as I climbed the stairs of my own home. This house, which I had built with so much love and sacrifice over the decades. I never imagined that I would return like this, with trembling hands, searching through my papers for that document that would allow me to escape for a few days from the routine. The taxi was waiting outside with the engine running. The driver was checking his watch impatiently, but I needed to find that damn passport, which was surely in the drawer of my desk. I ran up the stairs, panting a bit, because at 66 I no longer had the agility of before, but the excitement of the trip gave me strength. It was my first solo getaway in years. A Mediterranean cruise I had booked after months of saving every penny. My late husband, Robert, had always told me I deserved to see the world, but we never had the opportunity. Now, 3 years after his passing, I had finally been encouraged to fulfill that dream. I slipped quietly through the back door, trying not to make a sound. Gabriella and Diego were visiting, as they did every Sunday, and I didn't want them to find out I had returned. I knew my daughter would worry unnecessarily and might even try to convince me to cancel the trip. She had always been overprotective of me, especially since I became a widow. I tiptoed up the stairs, heading to my room where I had my desk with all my important documents. The passport should be there in the second drawer along with the insurance policies and the bank papers. Everything was perfectly organized, as my parents had always taught me. But just as I reached the second floor, their voices came through clearly from the living room. My room's window overlooked the garden where they were sitting, having coffee at the wrought iron table that Robert had bought for our 20th wedding anniversary. At first, I thought it was a normal conversation that young couples have about their future plans. Gabriella was speaking in that soft voice she always used when she was nervous. And Diego was responding in his calculating tone, which had always made me feel a sense of distrust, though I never admitted it, not even to myself. But the words that followed made my blood freeze. I stood frozen by the window, hiding behind the lace curtains I had sewn myself years ago. My breath became irregular, and I felt as if the floor was moving beneath my feet. "We can't wait any longer, Gabriella," Diego said with a firmness I had never heard before. "Your mother is in great health for her age. She could live another 10 or 15 years easily. We can't keep waiting that long." My daughter sighed deeply, as if she had been carrying a heavy weight for a long time. "I know, Diego, but I'm scared. She's my mother, after all, even though lately I feel like I don't recognize her." "Exactly," he continued. "She's starting to make decisions on her own, like this ridiculous trip. What's next? Maybe she'll marry some old man from her book club. We can't let her waste our future on the whims of old age." The words hit me like punches to the stomach. Our future. Whims of old age. What were they talking about? My mind raced, trying to process what I was hearing, but part of me refused to accept the reality of those cruel words. "The lawyer says that if we can prove she's losing her mental faculties, we can get legal guardianship," Diego continued. "And once we have control of her finances, we can make the decisions that really matter. This house is worth a fortune, and with her savings, we could finally buy the apartment we want." Gabriella fell silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. I held my breath, clutching onto the curtains, praying internally that my daughter would say no, that this was wrong, that she would never do something like this to her own mother. But her next words completely shattered my world. "You're right, my love. I've already spoken with Dr. Ramirez. He's willing to sign the papers we need. He says that with her age, it's easy to argue cognitive decline, especially if we show erratic behaviors like this sudden trip." It was hard for me to breathe. My legs trembled so much that I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. These were my loved ones, my only daughter, and the man she had chosen as her life partner, coldly planning how to take everything I had built over decades of honest work. The sound of the taxi horn interrupted my thoughts. The driver was impatient, probably thinking I had changed my mind about the trip, but I no longer thought about cruises or passports. I could only think of those terrible words I had just heard, of that betrayal I never imagined possible. For 50 years, I had built a life that I thought was perfect, orderly like a Swiss clock. Every morning I would wake up at 6 a.m., prepare coffee in the same white porcelain cup Robert had given me on our first anniversary, and begin my daily routine that never varied. I was a respected woman in the neighborhood, known for my punctuality, my immaculate garden, and my ability to organize the best family gatherings. My house was my pride. Every corner reflected years of meticulous care. The plants in the garden grew lush because I watered them religiously every afternoon at 5 p.m. The furniture gleamed because I cleaned them every Tuesday and Friday. The important documents were filed by date in the mahogany desk that had belonged to my father. Robert and I had worked tirelessly to build this legacy. He worked as an accountant at a textile company for 30 years, and I worked as a primary school teacher for 25. We never had extravagant luxuries, but we never lacked anything. We saved every penny, calculated every expense, and planned every investment, always thinking about Gabriella's future. When our daughter was born, I felt like life finally made complete sense. She was a beautiful, calm baby who slept through the night since she was 3 months old. I grew up with the certainty that I would be a successful woman and, above all, a good person. I taught her values, principles, the importance of honest work, and respect for others. Gabriella was an exemplary student throughout her education. She never gave me serious problems, always got excellent grades, participated in school activities, and had friends from respectable families. When she graduated with honors from college, Robert and I cried with emotion during the graduation ceremony. I remember her in that mint green dress, radiating happiness that day, hugging us and telling us that everything she had achieved was thanks to our example and dedication. She promised that one day she would repay us for all the effort we had invested in her education. I never imagined that repayment would come in the form of taking everything I owned. She met Diego when she was 28 at a work conference. He was an accountant like Robert, good-looking, educated, with a promising future. At first, I liked him. He spoke respectfully, helped with household chores when he came to dinner. He seemed truly in love with my daughter. Robert approved of him immediately. He said that Diego reminded him of himself when he was young. They married in a small but elegant ceremony in our garden. I took care of all the details, the flowers, the food, the decorations. Gabriella looked radiant in her ivory wedding dress, and Diego couldn't take his eyes off her. I thought they had found true love, just like Robert and I had found decades ago. The first years of marriage seemed like a fairy tale. They lived in a modest apartment near downtown, but they were always happy when they visited us on Sundays. Gabriella cooked those desserts I had taught her to make since she was little, and Diego helped Robert with small repairs around the house. We were a close family, or at least, that's what I thought. After Robert's death 3 years ago, I felt the world collapse on my shoulders. 43 years of marriage aren't forgotten overnight. The house felt huge and empty. Every corner reminded me of him. The first few months, I could hardly function. I cried constantly and had completely lost my appetite. Gabriella and Diego were my support during those difficult moments. They came every day, brought me prepared meals, and stayed to keep me company during the hardest nights. My daughter slept with me for the first few weeks, holding me when nightmares woke me up in the middle of the night. Diego took care of the legal paperwork, the insurance papers, everything I didn't have the strength to handle. Gradually, I started to regain my will to live. I went back to taking care of my garden. I resumed my cleaning routines. I began to cook again. Gabriella suggested I join the neighborhood book club, take yoga classes, do activities to meet new people. At first, I resisted, but eventually, I accepted her advice. Life began to have color again. I made friends at the book club, women my age who had also been widowed and understood perfectly what I was going through. I started enjoying small pleasures, a cup of tea in the afternoon, a good novel, chats with neighbors about the flowers in the garden. I even started thinking about traveling. Robert had always wanted to visit Europe, but we never had the opportunity or enough money. Now, with the house paid off and some savings accumulated, I could finally afford to fulfill that dream we had shared for so many years. When I told Gabriella and Diego about my plans to travel, their reaction was strange. They didn't show the excitement I had expected, but rather concern. They said it was dangerous for a woman my age to travel alone, that I could get sick far from home, and that it was better to wait. Maybe they could accompany me in the future. But I had made up my mind. For the first time in decades, I wanted something just for myself, without asking for permission, without considering the opinions of others. I felt free, independent, capable of making my own decisions. Robert would have been proud to see me so determined and brave. I organized everything meticulously. The passport, the reservations, the travel insurance, the right clothes. I even bought a new suitcase, a vibrant red one, because it seemed cheerful and optimistic. I was as excited as a little girl waiting for Christmas. I never suspected that this excitement, this newfound independence that I was so proud of, was precisely what was generating the sinister plans I had just overheard through my own window. The problem is that she's still too lucid, Diego continued as I remained hidden behind the curtains, feeling like my world was crumbling word by word. But Dr. Ramirez says that doesn't matter. With some testimony of erratic behavior and her age, we can easily get the mental incapacity declaration. Gabriella sighed deeply. And if she realizes what we're doing? You know my mother, Diego. She's more clever than she seems. For years, she managed the house finances when Dad was alive. She never made mistakes with the numbers. That's exactly why we need to act fast, he replied with a coldness that sent shivers down my spine. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to convince a judge. But if we present the case properly, showing that she's making impulsive decisions like spending money on unnecessary trips, we can argue a deterioration in judgment. The words pierced my chest like sharp daggers. Unnecessary trips, deterioration in judgment. How could they talk about me like this? How could my own daughter, the girl I had carried in my arms, who I had fed with my milk, who I had comforted through every childhood nightmare, be planning to destroy my life in such a cruel way? I've already spoken with Isabel, too, Gabriella added, mentioning my best friend from the book club. I told her I was worried because Mom had been acting strange lately, that sometimes she got confused with dates, that she repeated the same story several times. My heart completely stopped. Isabel was my confidant, the person with whom I shared my joys and worries every Tuesday at the cafe. Gabriella had been poisoning our friendship with lies about my mental health. How long had she been weaving this web of deceit behind my back? Excellent, Diego approved. We needed to seem like a troubling behavior pattern. What else can you get? He continued. Well, we could also talk to Mrs. Carmen, the neighbor next door. She's always been a bit of a gossip. If I tell her I'm worried about Mom's mental health, she'll surely start making up things she's noticed. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. They weren't just planning to steal my possessions, they were systematically destroying my reputation, my support network, everything that gave me a sense of belonging and dignity in the community where I had lived for decades. Perfect, said Diego. And don't forget to document anything strange she does. If she wakes up at odd hours, if she forgets to pay something, if she gets confused with any names, everything could serve as evidence. My stomach churned as I realized that for months, maybe years, my own daughter had been watching me like a predator. Watching her prey, waiting for any slip-up, any moment of normal human vulnerability to use it against me. And what about the house? Gabriella asked. It's the most valuable thing she owns. Once we have guardianship, we can easily sell it. We'll say it's too big for her, that she needs to be somewhere safer with specialized care. No one will question that decision, especially if she's already declared incapacitated. Tears began to roll down my cheeks, but I wiped them away quickly. I couldn't let them see me cry. I couldn't give them that satisfaction. This house was more than just a property. It was the home where I had raised my daughter, where I had loved my husband, where all the most important moments of my life had taken place. And then, what do we do with her? Gabriella asked, her voice as casual as if she were talking about the weather. There are several options. We could look for an affordable retirement home, one of those where the government subsidizes part of the cost. With her pension and what's left after selling the house and paying off our debts, it should be enough to keep her comfortable. Comfortable. They were talking about locking me away in a nursing home as if I were an old piece of furniture they no longer needed, but didn't want to completely throw away. My mind was racing frantically, trying to process the magnitude of this betrayal, the coldness with which they were planning the theft of my entire life. But thinking about it, Diego continued, maybe it's better to go for a private one, but farther away. That way, we won't have to visit her as often, and she won't be able to cause trouble with the neighbors or old acquaintances. Gabriella laughed, a short, bitter laugh I had never heard from her. You're right, the farther, the better. That way, we can live in peace without worrying that anyone will believe her if she tries to tell a different version of events. The plan was perfect, devilishly perfect. They would isolate me from everything and everyone I knew, from all the people who could help me or believe my version of the events. When do we start? Gabriella asked, and in her voice, I detected an impatience that froze my blood. Next week, while she's away on the trip, we can start moving some things. We'll go through her papers, photograph the important documents, maybe even take some jewelry and valuables without her noticing immediately. My breathing became irregular. They weren't just going to rob me legally, they were also going to loot my house while I was away, trusting them. They had probably already been inventorying things during their Sunday visits, calculating the value of each object, each memory, each family treasure. Be careful with Grandma's jewelry, Gabriella warned. Mom knows them by heart. She'd notice if any are missing. Don't worry, Diego replied. We'll only take some less noticeable pieces at first. By the time she notices, it'll be too late to do anything about it. The sound of the taxi horn grew more insistent. The driver probably thought I had changed my mind about the trip, but I could no longer think about cruises or passports. My mind was completely focused on this devastating revelation that had changed my life forever. I needed time to process all of this, to plan what to do. I couldn't confront them now. I wasn't ready. I needed to be smart, strategic. They thought I was a naive old woman, easy to manipulate, but they were about to discover that they had gravely underestimated Elvira. I stood motionless behind the curtains for several minutes after they finished talking, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just discovered. My mind filled with memories that now took on a completely different meaning, like pieces of a sinister puzzle that were finally falling into place. How many times had Gabriella casually commented on my supposed confusion with dates? How many times had Diego insisted on checking my bank accounts to help me? How many times had they exchanged knowing glances that I had interpreted as couples love when, in reality, they were conspiracies against me? I remembered that afternoon 2 months ago when Gabriella came to visit me and found me looking for my reading glasses. "Mom, you're wearing them," she had said with a strange smile, but I clearly remembered leaving them on the nightstand. Now I wondered if she had deliberately moved them to later tell that story as evidence of my mental decline. I also remembered when Diego so kindly offered to accompany me to the bank to simplify my paperwork. He insisted it would be easier if he had access to my accounts to help with the monthly payments. I had interpreted that offer as filial love, but now I understood he was setting the stage to have complete control over my finances. The times Gabriella had suggested I should consider selling the house because it was too big for one person alone. My hands trembled as I recalled Dr. Ramirez's visit last week. He had come without an appointment, saying that Gabriella had called, worried about my health. He asked strange questions about my memory, whether I had been feeling confused lately, if I had experienced episodes of disorientation. I had honestly answered that I was feeling perfectly fine, but he insisted on asking more questions, taking notes in a small notebook. Now I understood that this visit hadn't been a medical consultation, but an evaluation to support his declaration of mental incapacity. Dr. Ramirez, whom I had trusted for years, was colluding with my own family to destroy my life. Since when had this conspiracy begun? Had it started immediately after Robert's death, when I was most vulnerable and needed their support? Or had it started even earlier, while my husband was still alive, patiently waiting for the right moment to execute their plan, The idea that they had been pretending love and concern while secretly plotting my destruction, it filled me with a rage I had never felt before. But along with the rage came a deep and devastating sadness. My own daughter, the girl I had carried in my womb for 9 months, whom I had nourished with my body, whom I had raised with my values, now saw me as an obstacle to her happiness. Where had I gone wrong as a mother? What had I done wrong to raise someone capable of betraying me so cruelly? Had I been too generous, too permissive, or perhaps I hadn't been strict enough in teaching her about gratitude and respect for parents? Robert always said that Gabriella was perfect, that she was the daughter any parent would dream of having. How would he have reacted to this betrayal? Would he have felt as responsible as I did now? Or would he have seen signs that I had overlooked all these years? The sound of their voices interrupted my painful thoughts. They were saying their goodbyes, preparing to leave. I heard the sound of chairs being moved, footsteps in the yard, the final words of a conversation that had destroyed my world forever. "Remember, darling," Diego said. "We can't suddenly change our attitude toward her. We have to keep being the perfect son-in-law and daughter until everything's legal." "I know," Gabriella replied. "Although it's becoming harder and harder to pretend affection when I see her spending money on unnecessary things like that trip. But you're right, we have to keep up appearances until everything is under control." "Fake, darling." Those words hit me harder than all the others. For years, I had interpreted her hugs, her kisses on my cheek, her "I love you, Mom," as genuine expressions of filial love. Now I discovered it had all been an elaborate act, a mask to hide her contempt and greed. I heard the front door open and close. Their footsteps faded down the front path. The sound of their car engine started, gradually fading into the distance. Only then did I allow myself to collapse on the bed, my body shaking from the shock of everything I had just discovered. The taxi horn continued honking outside, growing more impatient. I would have to go down and cancel the trip, make up some excuse. I couldn't leave now, knowing what I knew. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide how to face this devastating betrayal. But as I moved toward the window to signal to the taxi driver, an idea began to form in my mind. What if I didn't cancel the trip? What if I used their plan of going through my things while I was away to observe them without their knowing? What if I pretended to be the naive old woman they thought I was, while in reality, I investigated the true depth of their betrayal? They had severely underestimated Elvira. They believed I was a vulnerable widow, easy to manipulate, but they were about to find out that the woman who had built a legacy alongside Robert, who had raised a daughter and managed a household for decades, had resources and strength that they couldn't even imagine. If they wanted to play dirty, I would teach them what it really meant to face a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. I descended the stairs with firm, determined steps, though my heart beat like a war drum. The taxi driver looked at me with relief when I appeared at the front door with my red suitcase and a smile that, although forced, had to look convincing. "Sorry for the delay," I said with the calmest voice I could muster. "I'm ready for the airport." Throughout the ride, I kept a casual conversation with the driver, commenting on the weather and my expectations for the cruise, but my mind was working at full speed, planning each move. I couldn't let Gabriella and Diego suspect that I had discovered their plan. My only advantage was that they believed they had me completely fooled. At the airport, while waiting for my flight, I called Isabel from a public phone. I needed to know exactly what Gabriella had told her about my supposed mental deterioration. "Isabel, dear," I began casually. "I'm at the airport about to leave, but I wanted to ask you something. Have you noticed anything strange about me lately?" There was an uncomfortable pause before Isabel responded. "Well, Elvira, the truth is Gabriella came to see me. She said you had been a bit confused about some things." My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice calm. "Confused? How exactly?" I asked. "She said you repeated the same stories several times, that sometimes you forgot where you put things, that you'd had some episodes of disorientation." I told her I hadn't noticed anything unusual, but she insisted it was very subtle and that I might not have realized it. The poison was spreading exactly as they had planned. "And what else did she say?" "She also mentioned you were making impulsive decisions, like this trip." She said she was worried because it's not like you to do something so spontaneous without consulting with the family. Each word confirmed the depth of their betrayal. They had been constructing a carefully designed narrative to make my independent decisions seem like symptoms of dementia. Isabel, I want you to know that I'm perfectly fine. If you ever notice something genuinely concerning in my behavior, please tell me directly, okay? Of course, dear, Isabel replied. Although, I must admit, Gabriella seemed really distressed. Maybe you should talk to her when you get back. After hanging up, I headed to the airport gift shop and bought a small, discreet recorder. If they were going to use my words against me, I could play the game too. During the flight, I mentally devised a detailed strategy for the coming days. The cruise was an emotional torture. Surrounded by happy couples and loving families, I couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal that awaited me at home. Every night, alone in my cabin, I silently cried for the daughter I thought I had, the one who, in reality, had never existed. But I also used that time to strengthen my resolve. I wouldn't let them defeat me so easily. When I returned 5 days later, I acted as if nothing had happened. I told Gabriella and Diego about the trip with genuine enthusiasm, showing them photos and gifts I had brought. They smiled and asked questions, but I could see the impatience in their eyes, the anxiety of wondering if I had noticed something different in the house. Indeed, several things had been subtly moved. My desk documents were in a different order. Some small jewelry had disappeared from my jewelry box. They had even taken photos of certain furniture and paintings, probably to calculate their resale value, but I pretended not to notice anything, acting like the absent-minded old woman they thought I was. Over the next few weeks, I began my own quiet investigation. First, I arranged a meeting with my trusted lawyer, Joaquin, without mentioning anything to Gabriella. I explained that I wanted to review my will and make sure all my legal documents were in order. Is there something specific that worries you? Joaquin asked, noticing something in my tone. Let's just say I've started questioning a few things about the people I trusted. I responded carefully. Is it possible to make some changes without anyone else knowing for now? Joaquin, who had been Robert's friend for decades, nodded with understanding. Of course, everything we discuss here is protected by attorney-client privilege. I also began to secretly document every interaction with Gabriella and Diego, every comment about my supposed confusion, every suggestion to sell the house, every question about my finances, all recorded on my small recorder. Soon, I would have enough evidence of their manipulative pattern, but the most revealing investigation happened when I decided to follow Diego one afternoon. I had noticed that lately, he was leaving work early on Wednesdays, and my instinct told me there was more behind his behavior. I put on a large hat and dark glasses, feeling ridiculous, but decided to go find the truth. I followed him to a cafe on the other side of town, where he met with a young woman accompanied by 2 small children. My heart stopped when I saw him hug her and kiss the children as if they were his own. This wasn't a business meeting or a casual meeting with a friend. I sat at a distant table, hidden behind a newspaper, and watched for an hour as Diego acted like a loving father and husband to this secret family. The children called him Dad. The woman spoke to him with the intimacy of a wife of many years. When they said goodbye, he handed her an envelope, which clearly contained money. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Diego wasn't just planning to steal from me to fund his life with Gabriella. He was also secretly supporting another family. My daughter wasn't the only victim of his manipulations. She was also his unconscious accomplice in a much bigger deception. That night, while pretending to watch TV in the living room, Gabriella and Diego conversed in the kitchen, believing I couldn't hear them. My hidden recorder picked up every word as they planned the next step of their strategy to get my mental incapacity declaration. Dr. Ramirez says we need more documented evidence, Diego said. Erratic behaviors, significant forgetfulness, questionable financial decisions. We could hide her blood pressure medications, Gabriella suggested. If she feels dizzy or confused, it would be easy to convince anyone she's losing her faculties. The cruelty of that suggestion took my breath away. They were willing to jeopardize my physical health to achieve their goals. There was no longer any doubt that these people were capable of anything, but I was also preparing myself. The war had begun, and they didn't know that their opponent already knew all their cards. The confrontation came one Tuesday afternoon when Gabriella came alone for her weekly visit. I had been avoiding them coming together. I needed to separate the pieces of their alliance to weaken them. I made coffee in my best porcelain set, just as I always did, but this time every gesture was calculated with military precision. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about your well-being," Gabriella began with that sweet voice that I now recognized as completely false. "Diego, I think it might be a good idea for you to talk to someone about how you've been feeling lately," Gabriella said. I placed the coffee cup in front of her with perfectly steady hands. "Someone like who, my love?" I replied calmly. "Well, maybe a specialist. Dr. Ramirez knows some very good psychologists who work with people your age," she suggested. "It's nothing serious, just to make sure you're processing Dad's passing and all the changes well." There it was, the start of the next step in their plan. She wanted to take me to a psychologist who was probably part of their conspiracy, someone who would officially document my supposed mental decline. I decided it was time to start revealing my cards, but gradually. "Gabriella, can I ask you something?" I sat down in front of her, studying every micro-expression on her face. "Do you think you've been acting strangely lately?" She avoided my direct gaze. "Not strange, Mom. But, well, I have noticed a few things, small forgetfulness, some decisions that seem a bit impulsive." "Like which decisions exactly?" I pressed. "The trip, for example. You've never done something like that without consulting us first, and sometimes you repeat the same stories or look for things you have right in front of you." Every word coming from her mouth sounded rehearsed. She had probably done it countless times. "Do you know what's curious, Gabriella? Isabel told me you went to talk to her about my supposed memory problems." For the first time, I saw a flash of panic in her eyes. "I was just worried, Mom. I wanted a second opinion from someone who knows you well. And Dr. Ramirez, you were so worried that you had to call him to come without me asking for a consultation." Now she was clearly nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the coffee cup. "Mom, I don't understand why you're questioning all this. We just want what's best for you." I slowly stood up and walked to the window, the same window from which I had heard the conversation that changed my life. "Do you know what else is curious, my dear? Yesterday, I found something very interesting at the bank." Her face visibly paled. "At the bank?" I confirmed. It turns out that someone had been making inquiries about my accounts, asking about procedures for transferring funds in case of mental incapacity. "Doesn't that seem strange to you?" Gabriella abruptly stood up, spilling some coffee on the table. "Mom, I think you're misinterpreting things." "Really?" I turned to face her with a smile that I knew was intimidating. "Then maybe you can explain to me why my grandmother's pearl necklace disappeared from my jewelry box, or why my desk documents have been constantly moved, or why you have copies of my house keys that I never gave you." Each accusation hit her like a slap in the face. I saw the exact moment when she realized she had been found out, when her mask of concerned daughter finally crumbled. "Have you been spying on us?" she asked, her voice now devoid of sweetness. "I don't need to spy in my own house, Gabriella. I just need to pay attention to what's happening under my own roof." At that moment, as if summoned by telepathy, Diego arrived. I heard him use his key to enter, confirming my suspicions that they had free access to my house when I wasn't around. His footsteps led him straight to the living room, where he found us in the middle of our confrontation. "What's going on here?" Diego asked, but his tone wasn't of genuine confusion. It was the tone of someone who knew exactly what was happening and was assessing how much damage had been done. "Your wife was explaining to me why she thinks I need psychological help," I answered with a calmness I didn't feel. "And I was telling her about my visit to the bank." Diego exchanged a quick glance with Gabriella, a silent communication that confirmed my worst suspicions about their coordination. "Elvira, I think there's a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding, Diego. In fact, I think I finally understand everything perfectly." I walked to my desk and opened the top drawer, pulling out a file I had been preparing for weeks. "For example, I understand you've been visiting a woman named Rosalia on Wednesday afternoons. A woman with 2 children who call you Dad." The color drained completely from Diego's face. Gabriella looked at him in genuine shock, clearly unaware of his secret family. What is she talking about? Gabriella stammered. Hasn't your wonderful husband told you, dear? I said, turning to her. He's been keeping another family for at least 3 years. The kids are around 5 and 7 years old. How long have you been married? 6 years, Gabriella whispered, and I saw the exact moment when she realized her marriage had been a lie from the start. Exactly. Which means Diego already had this other family when he married you. Did you ever wonder where he was getting the money to maintain 2 households on an accountant's salary? Diego finally found his voice, but it was no longer the charming son-in-law he had been pretending to be. This is none of your business, old busybody. There's the true personality you've been hiding too. I smiled with satisfaction as I watched his mask finally fall. You know what else I discovered, Diego? You're not an accountant at the company you said you worked for. In fact, that company closed 2 years ago. Gabriella collapsed onto the sofa, her face in her hands. What else have you been lying to me about? Oh, dear, I said, with a compassion that was completely genuine for the first time in weeks. You too are a victim of this man, but unfortunately, that doesn't change the fact that you chose to betray me to benefit him. The room filled with a tense and dangerous silence. The 3 of us knew there was no turning back now, that all the cards were on the table, and that the open war had finally begun. Diego stood up abruptly, fists clenched and an expression on his face that I had never seen before. There was no trace left of the polite and charming son-in-law I had known for years. You know what, old woman? I'm tired of pretending I care about you. You should have stayed quiet and let things follow their natural course. Gabriella looked up, tears running down her cheeks. Diego, what are you saying? I'm saying your mom is an annoying obstacle. She should have accepted her place a long time ago. His voice had a cruelty that made my blood run cold. Women her age should be grateful that someone takes care of them, not playing detective. But before I could respond, the doorbell rang. We all froze, as if we had been caught in the act, which in a way we had. Are you expecting someone? Gabriella asked, her voice trembling. I smiled with the first genuine satisfaction I had felt in weeks. Actually, yes. Excuse me for a moment. When I opened the door, Joaquin was standing in the doorway with a young woman dressed in a suit who I didn't immediately recognize. Elvira, we arrived just in time, it seems, Joaquin said with a smile. Perfectly on time, I confirmed. Gabriella, Diego, I want to introduce you to my lawyer, Joaquin, whom you already know, and to private investigator Elias, whom I've hired over the past few weeks. The shock on their faces was evident. Diego tried to regain his composure, but it was already too late. I don't understand what's going on here, he muttered. Detective Elias pulled a folder from her briefcase. Mr. Diego, for the past 3 weeks, we've been investigating your financial and personal activities at the request of Mrs. Elvira. We have photographic evidence of your meetings with Rosalia Mendez and her children, records of bank transfers to your account, and full documentation of your fraudulent employment. Gabriella slowly stood up, as if in a trance. Mom, how long have you known about all this? Since the day I supposedly went on my trip, when I came back for my passport and overheard you planning how to steal my entire life, I responded calmly. But you went on the trip, she protested weakly. Yes, I did, but not before installing hidden security cameras all over the house and hiring professionals to document every one of your movements while I was away. Joaquin opened his own folder. We have video recordings of both of you going through Elvira's private documents, photographing her belongings and removing jewelry and valuables. We also have audio recordings of your conversations about plans to declare her mentally incapacitated. Diego finally lost all composure. This is ridiculous. Gabriella is her daughter. She has a right to worry about her mother's well-being. Worry? Detective Elias smiled coldly. Is this how you call conspiring to commit fraud, theft, and kidnapping? Because that's exactly what we've documented. Kidnapping? Gabriella asked in a broken voice. Yes, dear, I responded with genuine sadness. Planning to have me committed to a mental institution against my will based on fabricated evidence constitutes kidnapping under the law. At that moment, as if the situation couldn't get more dramatic, someone else knocked on the door. This time, it was Joaquin who went to open it and returned with a woman I immediately recognized from my surveillance. Rosalia, Diego's other secret family. Sorry for the interruption, Rosalia said firmly but nervously. I'm Rosalia Mendez, and I need to speak with Diego immediately. Diego turned pale, almost green. Rosalia, what are you doing here? I came because I finally discovered the whole truth about you, Diego, she replied, turning toward Detective Elias. She came to ask me questions that completely opened my eyes. Gabriela looked between Diego and Rosalia as if watching a surreal movie. How long have you been married to him? Married? Rosalia laughed bitterly. He told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife took everything in the divorce, and that we couldn't marry officially until his financial situation improved. Who are you? Gabriela whispered. I'm his wife, Rosalia whispered back. Her words hit the room like thunder. The silence that followed was deafening. Rosalia leaned against the wall as if she had been struck physically. His wife, but we've been together for 4 years. My children believe he is their father. Gabriela and Diego have been married for 6 years, I gently informed her, which means you two have been victims of this man's lies all this time. Detective Elias seized the moment to continue with her report. Our investigations reveal that Diego has been using the money he got from Gabriela and the small amounts he stole from Elvira to maintain his double life. But that wasn't enough for his needs, so he developed this plan to access Elvira's entire estate. Rosalia turned to Diego with a fury that was palpable. You're telling me that all this time you've been stealing from an old lady to give money to my kids and me? It's not stealing, Diego protested desperately. It was just a temporary redistribution of resources. Temporary redistribution? Joaquin laughed humorlessly. Planning to fraudulently declare someone mentally incapacitated to steal their estate is not temporary redistribution, it's a federal crime. At that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. Gabriela slowly stood up and walked toward Diego. For a second, I thought she was going to defend him, support him despite everything that had been revealed, but instead, she slapped him across the face so hard it echoed through the room. You're a liar, a thief, and a manipulator, she yelled, her voice like when she was a little girl throwing tantrums. You made me an accomplice in betraying my own mother for money that wasn't even for us, but to support your other family. Diego touched his cheek in genuine shock. Gabby, can I explain all this? He pleaded. There's nothing to explain, Rosalia intervened. Your lies have ruined the lives of too many people. My children will grow up wondering why their father disappeared from their lives. Detective Elias closed her folder with professional satisfaction. Mr. Diego, I have here an arrest warrant for fraud, attempted theft, and conspiracy. I also have orders to freeze all your bank accounts while the origin of the funds is investigated. The arrival of the police officers transformed my living room into a scene that looked straight out of a crime movie. Diego was handcuffed while protesting his innocence with a desperation that was almost pathetic to witness. His screams about misunderstandings and conspiracies against him echoed throughout the house as they escorted him to the patrol car. Gabriela had completely collapsed on the sofa, crying in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. Rosalia stood by the window, hugging herself as she watched the man who had destroyed her life and the lives of her children being taken away. Detective Elias continued to document everything meticulously, preparing the case that would ensure Diego paid for each of his crimes. Joaquin approached me with an expression of mixed admiration and concern. Elvira, I must admit, you handled this brilliantly. But how do you feel now that everything has come to light? It was a complex question. On one hand, I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that justice was finally being served. Diego had manipulated and hurt too many people and deserved to face the consequences of his actions. But on the other hand, looking at my broken daughter and the traumatized Rosalia, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sadness for all the damage that had been caused. I feel relieved that the truth has come to light, I responded honestly, but I am also devastated by everything that has been lost in the process. Detective Elias closed her documents and approached me. Mrs. Elvira, I want you to know that your courage in investigating and confronting this situation has likely saved not just your estate, but also prevented Diego from continuing to victimize others. Our investigations revealed that he had been exploring similar schemes with other widowed women in the community. That information hit me deeply. I hadn't been the only one on his list of potential victims. How many other women my age had suffered what I was almost about to suffer if I hadn't discovered his plans in time? Rosalia finally spoke with a broken but determined voice. Mrs. Elvira, I want to apologize for everything that has happened. I didn't know anything about you or Diego's plans. If I had known the money he was giving us came from criminal activities, I would have never accepted it. I approached her and gently touched her arm. Dear, you are also a victim of this man. You have nothing to apologize for. We've both been deceived by someone who is an expert in manipulation. What's going to happen to my children? Gabriella asked, tears in her eyes. They love Diego like a father. How do I explain to them that it was all a lie? It was a heart-wrenching question with no easy answers. Children are resilient, I said, though I knew it sounded inadequate. With love and support, they can get through this, and maybe now they'll have the opportunity to know their real father without Diego's lies getting in the way. Joaquin interjected with some practical information. Rosalia, as part of the investigation, we will be able to trace the funds Diego provided to you and your children. If that money came from criminal activities, the state may offer some form of compensation or assistance during the transition. Gabriella finally looked up with red eyes and swollen cheeks. Mom, I don't know how to apologize for what I've done. There are no words to express how sorry I am. I sat next to her, feeling the weight of all the years we had lost due to Diego's manipulations. Gabriella, I need to understand something. At any point, did you really believe I was losing my mental faculties? Or did you always know you were lying? She covered her face with her hands. At first, at the beginning, Diego convinced me that you were really showing signs of confusion. He said it was normal for me not to notice because I saw you so often, but that he could see it more objectively. Little by little, I started looking for evidence of what he said, and when I didn't find any, he convinced me that I had missed it or misunderstood it. It was a sophisticated psychological manipulation technique. Diego had slowly brainwashed my daughter, making her doubt her own perception and judgment. And when did you realize it wasn't true? I asked. I think deep down, I always knew something was wrong, but Diego was so convincing, so confident. And, honestly, the idea of having access to your estate was tempting. We're neck-deep in debt, Mom. Diego told me it was the only way to save our future. Detective Elias took careful notes. That's exactly the pattern we see in financial manipulation cases. The perpetrator identifies economic and emotional vulnerabilities. Then, they exploit them systematically. Joaquin opened a new folder. Elvira, there's something else we need to discuss. During our investigations, we discovered that Diego had started forging your signature on some banking documents. Fortunately, we stopped him before he could make significant transfers, but we need to make sure all your accounts are protected. The revelation that he had been forging my signature hit me like another slap in the face. What kind of documents? I asked. Beneficiary change forms, requests for additional credit cards, some inquiries about loans against the value of your house. He was preparing multiple ways to access your funds once he had legal control. Rosalia shook her head in disbelief. How could I have been so blind? All the signs were there, but I wanted to believe his lies because the alternative was facing the fact that I was raising my children alone. Don't blame yourself, I said firmly. Diego was a skilled predator. He knew exactly how to manipulate our hopes and fears. Detective Elias closed her notebook. With all the evidence we've gathered, Diego will face multiple charges. Bank fraud, document forgery, attempted kidnapping, and possibly more charges as the investigation continues. We're talking about a significant prison sentence. As the officers finished processing the scene, I realized that, although I had won this battle, the emotional scars would take a long time to heal. My relationship with Gabriella was damaged, possibly irreparably. Rosalia and her children would have to rebuild their lives from scratch, and I would have to learn to trust again after this devastating betrayal. But for the first time in months, I felt in control of my own life again. 6 months later, I sat at my favorite cafe with Isabel, watching how life had taken turns I never would have imagined. Diego's trial had ended the previous week with a sentence of 12 years in prison for multiple charges of fraud and forgery. Justice had been served, but the emotional wounds were still slowly healing. Isabel stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "You know what impresses me the most about this whole situation, Elvira?" she asked. "The way you handled everything. I never saw it coming." I laughed softly. The first genuine laugh I'd had in a long time. Neither did I, to be honest. I don't think I even knew what I was capable of until I was forced to find out. The relationship with Gabriella had been the most complex aspect of this whole experience. In the first months after Diego's arrest, we barely spoke. She was dealing with her divorce, personal bankruptcy, and psychological therapy to process years of emotional manipulation. I needed space to heal from the betrayal and decide if it was possible to rebuild our mother-daughter relationship. "Have you heard from Gabriella lately?" Isabel asked, as if reading my thoughts. "We talked on the phone last week," I answered carefully. "She's living in a small apartment near downtown, working double shifts to pay off her debts. Therapy seems to be helping her understand how Diego manipulated her perception of reality for so long. It felt strange talking about my own daughter as if she were a distant acquaintance, but that was the current reality of our relationship. Forgiveness was a gradual process, and although I had begun to forgive her intellectually, my heart still needed time to heal completely. "And what about Rosalia and her children?" Isabel asked, shifting to a more hopeful topic. That was a more uplifting story. Rosalia turned out to be an incredibly strong woman. She managed to locate the biological father of her children, who had been searching for them for years. Diego had told them she died in an accident, while he told her that he had abandoned them. Isabel shook her head with indignation. That man was truly evil. He was, I agreed. But what's surprising is that Rosalia and I have developed a genuine friendship. We meet for lunch once a month, and her children call me Grandma Elvira. It's strange how something so destructive can eventually create unexpected connections. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had gained a sort of surrogate family through the betrayal of my biological family. Rosalia's children, ages 5 and 7, had accepted my presence in their lives with the natural ease of children. To them, I was simply another caring adult who had appeared in their world, not a symbol of their father's falsehoods. "And your travel plans?" Isabel asked with a knowing smile. "Are you still thinking of exploring the world?" "In fact, I have reservations for a tour of Greece next month," I said with pride. "And Rosalia will be taking care of the house while I'm away." It's funny how life gives you exactly what you need when you least expect it. We had decided that Isabel would stay some nights too, turning my absence into a prolonged gathering of friends. The idea of having trusted women look after my home gave me a peace I hadn't felt in years. "Aren't you afraid to travel alone at your age?" Isabel asked, repeating the same question that Gabriella and Diego had used to manipulate me. "I'm 66, not 96, I replied firmly. "And after everything I've faced this year, what could be more terrifying than discovering your own daughter was planning to steal your entire life?" We had decided to keep the more sordid details of the case private to protect Rosalia's children. But the community knew enough for my reputation to have completely changed. I was no longer seen as the vulnerable widow who needed protection, but as the clever woman who had unmasked a sophisticated criminal. "Do you know what's the most liberating thing about all this?" I asked, looking at Isabel. "For the first time in decades, I'm making decisions based solely on what I want, not on what others expect of me or how my decisions will affect others." Isabel nodded in understanding. "It's like you've regained parts of yourself you had forgotten existed." Exactly. For years, I had been a wife, mother, daughter-in-law, neighbor, always defined by my relationships with others. Now, I'm rediscovering who Elvira is as an independent individual. It was exciting and terrifying at the same time. My phone rang, interrupting our thoughts. It was Joaquin with news about the final liquidation of Diego's assets. "Elvira, I have good news. We managed to recover almost all the money he stole from you, plus interest. We were also able to secure a compensation fund for Rosalia and her children." After hanging up, I realized that this chapter of my life was finally closing. All the loose ends were being tied up. All the accounts were being settled. It was time to look forward instead of back. "Do you have any regrets?" Isabel asked as we walked back to our cars. I paused and carefully thought about her question. Regret. Not about how I handled things once I discovered the truth, but I do regret not trusting my instincts more over all those years. There were signs, small things that bothered me about Diego, but I ignored them because I wanted Gabriela to be happy. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the street as I reflected on everything I had learned. I think the greatest gift this terrible experience gave me was the confirmation that I'm stronger and more capable than I ever believed. For years, I saw myself as someone who needed protection and care, but it turns out that I am perfectly capable of protecting and taking care of myself. That night, as I prepared to sleep in my quiet home, but no longer lonely, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had the same 66-year-old face, but her eyes held a strength and determination that hadn't been there before. Tomorrow, I would start packing for Greece. The following week, I had an appointment to learn how to use a computer. Next month, Rosalia and I planned to take dance classes together. My life was full of new and exciting possibilities. I lay down that night with a deep sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I was alone in my house, but for the first time in a long time, that loneliness felt like freedom rather than abandonment. I had survived the deepest imaginable betrayal and come out the other side stronger and wiser. Tonight, I am alone, I thought as I drifted to sleep, but for the first time at peace.